2 weeks ago, we had a little informal meetup, and I mentioned the possibility of giving a presentation on disruption theory, and this is the result of that. Those people requested it. So, a big question is, what is disruption? You know, what do we mean by this? So, one great current example is of the iPhone. So you can see this kind of dark up here, dark blue is Apple, and down here we have Nokia. And you can see between 2007 and 2011, there's this dramatic shift in the profit in the mobile phone industry. So in 2007, Apple came out with the iPhone, which was, at least initially, had poor audio quality, and it was more expensive than all the other phones. So a big question is that we're going to answer is, you know, how did that work? What happened there? We're also going to talk about, you know, what happens if we try to apply this sort of disruption theory to Bitcoin and Ethereum. So the talk has roughly two halves. In the first half, I'll explain disruption theory as described by Clayton Christensen. So, I don't know, how many people know who Clayton Christensen is? Okay, great, that's wonderful. So for the rest of you, he's a business theory professor at Harvard and very well known in Silicon Valley by a lot of people. So he has great things to say. I have some pointers in the slides that I'll make available online. You can read up on them. So in the second half of the talk, I'm going to apply this disruption theory that we're going to learn to Bitcoin and Ethereum. So one model of business progress is that, you know, you're always walking the wrong way on an escalator. What is good enough in some particular market is always increasing, and you always got to work just a little bit to stay ahead of that. And so disruption theory gives a slightly different model. It's saying that what is good enough is often exceeded by products. So, and that once it gets beyond what is good enough, then an entrant to the market can come in with a low-end product and take market share away from the incumbent. So on the right hand here, I'm drawing this black little curve there to indicate that there's a distribution. At any given time, there's a distribution of users. And this line that I wrote as good enough, that's just indicating, say, the mean or the median of the distribution with time. So at any point in time along here, if we pick it, and there'll be a distribution of users. Some users will want very high performance. Other users may not need that high performance. And later on, when we're talking about Bitcoin, I'm going to compare, for example, the dollar. I'm going to say that's going to be like the incumbent, and Bitcoin will be the entrant. Well, so Christensen's big idea is that good companies can fail. Good companies can be doing everything right and still fail. So if you're doing the things as many business schools teach you, you'll be trying to improve your product to satisfy your best customers. So that's what Christensen calls sustaining innovations. And if it's if it's all about sustaining innovations, if it's all about improving products along a known trajectory, then incumbents always win, or nearly always win. But if you move to a new trajectory, say someone comes with a low-end business model, then that's only, to start with, that's only going to take customers away from the incumbents. The incumbent doesn't really care that much about. They may be low margin customers, and so the incumbent is very happy to let them go. So just to be clear, I'm happy to have questions, so please speak up just as you have questions, please.
The two different trajectories seem to be, I don't know, it feels like it almost needs another axis to represent the fact that the disruptive technology is like coming from a different angle. I mean, at the moment, you've just got a simple axis of performance, complexity, and cost all in the same place.
Yep. I'm going to have another axis here in a second.
Oh, cool. So it's like, at the moment, like if you take a vertical line, then the disruptive technology is just on all axes that are visible, it's strictly inferior.
Yeah, so it might even be possible to have, more than one axis. Your metrics can be kind of complex. But yes,
yeah,
so we'll talk a little bit about that. And so yes, very good point. I have So one thing a couple of notes here. It could be that your y-axis, this vertical axis, could, depending on your metric, it could be represented. It might need to be a logarithmic plot. And another kind of fun thing is that, determining whether or not a technology is sustaining or disruptive is, it doesn't have anything to do with the complexity of the technology underneath it. So a disruptive innovation is, that I'm showing here, is, in this case, I'm just showing that you're going to a low-end product. You're bringing in something that costs much less. We'll talk about another new market disruption in a second. So sustaining innovations could be that you have like the switch from analog to digital in communications, or switch from 2G to 4G. That could be a sustaining innovation, even though it's really a big, complex technical thing. So you had a question?
Yes. Correct. So the vertical axis there, so it's performance, complexity, cost, which they'll go up or down. It's just saying the high end is more upmarket and the low is the bottom end of the market. But I guess what we're missing here is which one's more competitive.
Out of performance, complexity, and cost, or what's?
Well, I guess if the graph, the high end is performance, complexity, and cost, that just says our high end product, and the bottom end is the low end product, and there's definitely both of those can be very competitive, right? People, low end products sell, and high end products also sell. But the winner in any given situation, I guess I don't see it on the graph.
Right. So you remember this distribution that I talked about earlier? This little curve right here? So the idea is that when you're higher on the... So if you're up higher on this curve, you're going to want the higher performance and the higher complexity and cost. If you're down here, you'll choose the lower performance or lower complexity and cost product. So, and this performance that is good enough is indicating the mean of the distribution. So in this curve here, if we take a slice, right here, maybe the only product you have is the incumbent's product down here, which is not really that good. But if you take a slice in the middle, you know, depending on where you take your slice at, then the distribution of users will indicate, you know, which product is chosen. So it's a very rough model. We're not trying to get too precise. I don't know if I helped out. Did I help out at all?
I think that you can help by giving an example.
I think like good enough, you mean good enough for like the one standard distribution to chip away at the curve of user base, something with that.
Yeah, I mean, you could define it different ways. I'm essentially, in my mind, I'm just saying it's good enough for the mean user of the distribution.
Good enough for the mean user.
Yeah, or the median user, if you want to say that, the mean of the users of the distribution. But yeah, if you want to say the median, I think that might be simpler to think about. I have a question over here.
In this model, is the entrant represent a disruptive innovation, or does it just come to market with something that is sort of less complex and lower cost and has worse performance at the same time axis as the incumbent, and still take away people because they're good enough in terms of distribution of some percentage of that product?
I'm sorry. Could you say it one more
It
time?
doesn't necessarily require that the entrant be a disruptive innovation for this to be true, correct?
You know.
Because it could be a worse product.
Okay, so I'm going to actually talk about that on the next slide here, about what it means for it to be a disruptive innovation. So I don't know if maybe we can, if you'll wait just a second, I'll check back with you to see if I answer your question. We have some answer question. Actually, you please.
So, I might be misunderstanding what I'm saying, but it looks like at any given point in time, the entrant is like, you know, like say a few years behind where the incumbent was. Like their, you know, level of performance, complexity, cost is at the point that the incumbent was, you know, X amount of time before that. Is that a correct reading of the graph?
You know, that's not. It might be. It might be the quality of the product that is coming out, but I think almost always the business model is changed. So the quality of the product coming out may be the same as what it was a few years ago for the incumbent, but the business model certainly has changed. There has to be something different, or else, you know, I'm not certain it makes sense.
There's more time on the graph, I think, this time. It's like crops.
Jay.
Yeah, just a couple common examples that sort of frame this. There's usually automobiles and consumer electronics, where the Japanese would come in and go after the low end of the market. It was being ignored by the incumbents who were going after higher margins and a higher performance feature set. So what the incumbents do is they allow others to come in because the incumbents are ignoring the bottom end of the market. So they come in with a lower quality product perhaps at first, but they quickly, because they're more agile, innovate and move up the feature set.
Yeah, so I'll give a few examples here in a second in the computing market. So let me go ahead. Let's see. I'll check back and see if you have questions here in a minute. Let's see if I go ahead, if I'll answer some of your questions. So we were discussing, you know, what it means to be a disruptive innovation, and you know, if we just think about what it means to be, what does innovation mean? So I think the way Christensen defines it is it's not just a novelty or an invention, but it's actually something like an invention plus a business model. So it's something new that has potential value, plus a mechanism to realize that potential value. So thinking back to some examples, Tesla was invented essentially alternating current, and he invented all of the mechanisms to make alternating current a reality in our world, lots of motors and dynamos and generators, but he was not the person that profited from it. And also the same thing with Philo T. Farnsworth with electronic television. So let me continue here with a bit further example. So back in the 80s, there was the PC was introduced. I'm sorry, the mini computer was the computing platform that was available at the time. And IBM and DEC and Wang were making these computers which might sell for $500,000 and that have margins of 60%. And at the same time, Apple came out with these little computers that were essentially toys. They were used by hobbyists, and they were not good enough really for anything else but toys and hobbies. And you know, and the engineers at DEC and Wang could have made those computers, but it wasn't something that their customers really wanted because they're toys. They just weren't good enough for their customers. So they didn't go after that market. When the engineers at DEC or Wang went and talked with their managers and said, hey, this is important stuff these guys are doing, these, you know, personal computers, the managers said, well, you know, we can get 60% margins on products that sell for $500,000 to our best customers, or we can go after these crummy products that not many people are buying and only have margins of 20%. So this is the innovator's dilemma. Do you continue to sell products to your best customers for good margins, or do you go after this new a new domain where it may not be that technically different, but it's just a different business model, which could disrupt your current business model. So DEC and Wang stayed with the mini computers, and they went out of business. IBM set up a separate business unit in Florida, and they came out with a PC, and they survived. So back to your question there. You know, the PC was not really technically that different from the mini computers, but it was just a different business model essentially. It was a low-end entrant, and IBM and the people that were making PCs were able to kind of, because they investigated that, they invested the time into making those. By the time that they became good enough, they were able to sell them and make money and eventually force out DEC and Wang. So, any questions about the innovator's dilemma?
Can he do both?
Well,
like gradually moving from, you know, lucrative business which he has right now towards more risky, kind of less profitable right now business, but which potentially in the future, like what Intel does.
Well, so there's a few different things to say about it. So in this case here, you'll notice in this example, DEC and Wang actually went out of business, and IBM actually set up a separate business unit so that they weren't competing within the same group. So it's like they have there's different business models associated with the different products. And so if you have one organization trying to subsist under different business models, I think the idea is that doesn't work. So if you want to do both, you set up a separate business unit. Or maybe you buy an entrant.
Basically separate because you don't want to present a choice to your customer. You can choose either this expensive good product or this cheap, unreliable, unproven. Why do you need? Well, I wonder how much I can deviate from the main topic.
I think the reason that I think it's like
You don't want to compete for what?
Well, it's like, I mean, if you look right here, look at this example right here. So let's say you have two guys. One guy is coming up with a PC presentation to the manager, and the manager has grown up selling, getting 60% margin on $500 million products. So 60% margin is much better than 20%.
And 500,000 is also much better than 2,000.
Right. So if you come into your manager, you got two guys coming in. One guy says, I'm going to make a better mini computer, and it's going to have 61% margin. And the next guy comes in and says, the PC is going to be amazing, and I'm going to sell it for $2,000, and it's going to get 20% margin. So you're going to have a third the margin. You're going to make less money.
Well,
So,
you have to also take into account the size of the market in terms of units,
well, so
which is hard.
So if you'll forgive me, I would say that if you were in charge, you may be smart enough to see that, but these managers,
So IBM solved that by making a different business here.
Yes.
That's smart manager was, right?
Yes.
That's how they did that. Okay.
yes.
So isn't it a fairly obvious strategy now that this innovator's dilemma principle is now pretty widespread? To just, for large companies to just basically copy the business models of all the newcomers in their technology expertise sort of area. Because as long as those new upstarts are net profitable, even if the amount of profit is tiny, it's not that expensive for the big companies to just start another division that copies the market. So like in this case, obviously like the big mini computer manufacturers, if they'd known about this innovator's dilemma principle, they could have just built a PC division, and it wouldn't have been profitable for a while, and it might have just failed. And so what?
Well, I can give a response to that, but
Yeah.
did you want to respond?
I think one of the reasons why the incumbents have a tough time creating this, new division is because they're afraid of cannibalization, losing their existing margins to the slower-end product, which may just get
better
good
than
enough and get popular enough so that it's going to divert their existing customers from their current lines of product to this new line of product, which is less profitable by definition.
That's completely irrational reasoning though, because either someone else is going to make that market happen, in which case they lose it to a competitor, or it will be successful and they get the control over that new market, or it won't happen at all, in which case their original model isn't correct. So like in all possible scenarios, building the competing small division is the better strategy.
They don't know what's going to succeed, right? I mean, Microsoft tried this forever, and Facebook had to buy WhatsApp for $20 billion. The problem is there's a million of these things, right? You don't know which one's really going to succeed.
Also, there is another point of view. You have branding. Sometimes you dilute the brand by actually saying, I'm this and I'm that, and you're everything and you're nothing.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, and I think we'll also come back to another argument in a minute that's specific to Bitcoin. Sometimes, the incumbent just thinks that they just don't want to go after this new market. They think it's completely silly and stupid.
We also have shareholders and limited resources. Every company has limited resources. You can't just
Right.
you can't just chase
If
everything.
you ever work at a really big company, they suck and they can't do it. And that's just the way it is. There are just too many problems. There's too much overhead. There's lawyers and competitiveness and weird political shit that rot sets in and
Right.
you can't do this.
So it's interesting that those big companies that do just scatter lots of resources into lots of different innovations like Google are actually doing really well.
It's usually cheaper to buy companies, right? Than to try to become one of these things that can move that.
But some companies are doing it. If you look at CBS with Apple and the Hulu with the other networks, they are trying to compete with Netflix a little bit. They're not necessarily being very successful at it, but they are putting the effort out there to step in there.
Yeah, so you guys, I'm going to leave some of those advanced topics to you. So I think that's, sorry, that's you're certainly right. So here's a little bit of a big picture. So just looking here, we're looking at the kind of the mainframe to the iPad or mainframe to the tablet. So, we've had a bunch of disruptions over time. The mainframe got replaced by the mini by the PC and the tablets and the smartphone are now taking market away from the PC. The PC market is flatlined and even it's going down essentially. And the abilities, the things that you can do with, these products have continually increased. So let's talk a bit about the iPhone as an example. So Christensen talks a lot about the jobs to be done. He says, it's important to understand what the job is that your product is solving. So if we think about the iPhone, and we look back at this sort of a graph, and we say, well, the incumbent phone makers have been making phones which had better audio quality and better network connection. So they might say, well, even if they knew about this theory, they might say, well, the iPhone, sure, it kind of had crummy audio, but it was also very expensive. It was more expensive than any phone on the market. So how could that be an entrant product? How could it be a low-end disruption if it's so expensive? And I guess the answer is, is that the iPhone and the Android succeed not as expensive phones, but as inexpensive mobile computers. And so I think Steve Ballmer was thinking about, the iPhone as a phone when he laughed at it. So, that in his, it's probably an easy mistake to make. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but RIM up there, RIM is this gray right above the yellow Samsung, right below the blue Apple. RIM focused on their own email products. They didn't move forward with the full mobile computing platform. Nokia was also bet on feature phones, kind of the dumb phones, and they, both essentially disappeared from the market. So you asked about a new dimension. So far we haven't really talked about how, some of these things, about a new market disruption. We've just looked at two dimensions. But often what happens when a new product comes in is it has a new metric of performance, which is off away from the old plane of performance. So you have a few options for building some products. You can build a product that is better in the established way of thinking. You can have something that is low cost coming into an established market, or you can have something that is going into a new market where there's no competition. And so that last one there is the best way to go. And building a better product in an established market is the worst thing to do. It's the toughest thing to do, I guess. Maybe worse is not the right word to say. So after some time, customers may move from the old plane of competition to the new plane. Okay, so now we have a little more fun stuff. I'm sure some of you knew all this stuff about disruption theory. So yeah, let's answer questions first before I go on. Please.
Your last slide.
Yes.
Maybe I didn't catch your nuance about the best business model. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So right here, you could, if you look, this part up there, that was the previous slides I had, and you got some options for building a business model. You can try to bring a better product into an established market up there. You can try to build a better PC when there are already PCs there, or you can try to bring it, you know, something that's much lower cost product in. You know, you can be Compaq or Dell with respect to IBM, or you can bring a tablet into market.
Your definition of best sounds more like most interesting without regard to risk.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. So the problem is, if you're going to do new market right, you don't have the competitors to guide you, and so it certainly is a riskier thing. So you may fail. It might be more risky. So any more questions on these slides?
This comment is that in another case, competing on price. Competing on price just commoditizes every product in that market. So what Apple's done very well, and it's an arguably better strategy if you can do it, is to go and create a new market where you can create the pricing that you want and the margins that you want. And that's what Apple's done very, very well.
Okay. I think that there's lots that could be said about Apple and Android. We could talk more afterwards about that if you'd like. So I'll share these slides afterwards if any of you would like that. Okay, so you know, one important question is, what is the job of Bitcoin? So you could say, is it a currency? So, you know, thinking about that question, I would say it's an okay store of value, it's an okay medium of exchange, it's a bad unit of account. And so bad unit of account in the respect that, you know, if you go buy something, even on some place that accepts Bitcoin, they don't denominate the price in Bitcoin, they denominate it in dollars or your local currency. And so it doesn't require any fees other than transaction fees, so maybe it can be thought of as having a low-end business model if you're thinking about it, comparing it with fiat currency. Another possible job for Bitcoin is as an electronic funds transfer network. And so I think that's a great job for it. The only problem is that there may be some changes required in order to get the volume that say Visa or other standard transfer mechanisms provide. And so the fees are low. Again, you might think of it as a low-cost entry. So there's other jobs. But let's just think about that. The Bitcoin as a transaction network. So here's a log plot of the transaction volume for the past 5 years, and you can see that it's been growing exponentially. Say from 2005 to 2013, it was growing exponentially, but it kind of flattened off, and we're still an order of magnitude below Western Union, maybe 2 orders of magnitude below Discover, maybe 3 below Visa. So, you know, if we're ambitious and we really want to take on some of these networks, it might be that something needs to happen. Maybe increase the block size, for example. So, you know, I would say that cryptocurrencies are not yet good enough to be, you know, for EFT. Maybe not good enough, and as I said before, good enough could mean that there are many users that they are good enough. You know, Bitcoin is being used now, but it's not widely used. You have to use this long Bitcoin address. You know, it might be that your grandmother or maybe even your spouse may not want to put the time in to use a long Bitcoin address. So there's some challenges to using it for EFT, in addition to the volume one I mentioned earlier. So what about currency? What about, Bitcoin as a currency. So one thing to think about is what about the dollar? What is the job of the dollar? So I would say that the dollar is doing a great job as a currency. It's has a great store of value, it's a great medium of exchange, unit of account, but there's a cost. And I guess you may be able to imagine a better currency, but it's at least the best fiat currency in the world. It's the reserve currency of the world. There's not another one out there that's better than that, the dollar. I think that's a reasonable statement to make. So, but there is some cost for this, and you can talk about those costs. How important they are to you, how significant you think they are. So one question is the dollar just serving the high end of the market? Is it only serving the 1%? Is it, in other words, is it over-serving most people if we think about our trajectory? So I think that there's an argument to be made there that it's over-serving many people. Joseph Stiglitz wrote a paper on inequality. I'm sure that we could find papers. We could discuss this at length, but I don't know if I want to talk about them more. I think this is the sort of argument that you might want to make if you're looking forward, if you're thinking about the dollar making inroads, or Bitcoin making inroads as a cryptocurrency. So I argue that if you're thinking about Bitcoin as a currency, then it's in a new market. So the dollar has legal restrictions against competitors. So the Liberty dollar, was shut down. But Bitcoin is off in this new plane of existence. It's not considered a currency by the government. Warren Buffett and Robert Shiller are happy to let it be off in a separate plane of existence. They're not. I don't think that they see it as a threat, according to these quotes. And so the people that are using it, they're interested in different metrics of performance. For example, at least some people are interested in Bitcoin because the inflation rate is controlled by consensus or by algorithm rather than by the Federal Reserve. So I think that there's no shame in agreeing with people when they say that Bitcoin is not a great currency yet. So I believe it'll improve, it'll become getter, and if it's not Bitcoin, then some other cryptocurrency will improve and gain some of these features that we don't have now. It'll improve the usability of Bitcoin, for example, and the network, the transaction volumes. So I also think that customers, so to speak, will move from the old plane to the Bitcoin plane. But the question is, how much and when? So if you believe this model, then if we kind of turn our axis so that we're just looking at the two-dimensional plane again, not looking at the three-dimensional, and we accept the idea that Bitcoin is kind of in the not good enough mode, and it's only going to be good enough for some low-end users. Let's say we start moving up the trajectory a little bit, and it becomes good enough for another set of customers. And the question is, who are those customers? Who are the next set of low-end users? Is it low-income people, or is it people who are, not the most extreme libertarians, but at least have a little bit of libertarian view? I'm not actually certain I know the answer to that, but I think an important goal for Bitcoin, if they want to, for Bitcoin to see further adoption, is to figure out who those low-end users are.
Should we be looking at Bitcoin as coming in as entering the market on that sort of parallel metric of performance plane, like a bit like the way that an iPhone is a cheap small computer as opposed to an expensive phone. Bitcoin is coming in a different angle than just as a currency. It's like a generalizable, enforceable system for contracts, and it happens to be able to do finance as well. Seems to me like the more likely way in which Bitcoin will succeed is by being something that's more powerful than just a currency, not by doing currencies in some way better.
You're certainly right. So you're certainly right. It could be that there's no need to even think about it being a currency. That may be that, for example, the electronic funds transfer thing or other mechanisms are more valuable, and that there's no need at all to think, that trying to use it directly as a currency is the wrong way to go about it.
Well, I think it will be, useful in lots of those fields, but it will probably succeed only by doing something that is new, not by incrementally improving the function. Most people aren't really aware or, going to spend lots of effort in improving how well they do international money transfers. But, there may be a lot more scope for a large market in a completely new way of making contracts.
So I guess this graph here was just my way of trying to figure out, I wasn't trying to say that it was not off. I was just kind of rotating the axis here. So I think it still can be on a separate plane. But so I guess the basic question is who are the best customers for Bitcoin? What is the best job to be done? So I agree with you that there's lots of options for that. Please.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting comment. In your previous slide, I think, looked at Bitcoin for electronic funds transfer, which was a need. People need to transfer funds electronically. And I think that's more interesting looking at the utility space based on need rather than function. So if you're saying, what is the function of this? What is the function? Well, that's a question, or an answer looking for a question. A need is a question. And so looking at the utility space of a need, price performance based on a need, like this one, is more interesting.
Great. I like that. I like that you have the strong opinion on that. Okay, any other comments or questions on these?
I don't think it's true the dollar is doing a great job. It's not true at all. With all the debt, its quality as a reserve currency is being eroded more and more and more. You can see, like in the world, we're more and more becoming a multi-currency world, and this is a sign that the dollar is not doing a great job.
Yeah, so, I don't pretend to be an expert on this. I think, my last statement on this slide was, one of the things I tried to say is that it's the best in the world. So, I don't know that, I'm not certain which currency you would prefer to have, leaving aside cryptocurrencies, as your reserve currency.
Oh, if they would let me have the Swiss franc, but the Swiss central bank is not willing because its economy is very small. So it's not that the dollar is so good, it just has power.
Right. So Steve, please.
But that fact is what it means, what makes the dollar a good reserve currency. Right? So in general, for reasons that economists often think are dumb, but I don't think they're dumb, countries prefer to be more capitalistic, countries prefer to have production. If you want to have a reserve currency, it means that you're going to let other countries hold on to your currency as a reserve. They're going to generate a big stock. Well, the only way that can happen, just in accounting terms, is for your country to generate debt and let the other people purchase that debt, which means you have to run a trade deficit. All the things people complain about the U.S. economy, that we run a trade deficit, right? We import lots more than we export. That's an accounting necessity due to the fact that we have a reserve currency. We have to keep shipping out U.S. debt, which means in exchange we're going to get in foreign goods. Yeah. So if the application domain is reserve currency, then you need to have a growing debt. And we bear the cost of it in terms of our economy, in terms of our lackadaisical industrial production, for example. That's a cost we bear to have a reserve currency. Now there's a question whether or not, it's such a wonderful thing to have a reserve currency.
The pound was an industrial power as it was a reserve currency.
The US dollar was an industrial power as a reserve currency for some time too.
Exactly, yeah.
But it can't last if there's a lot of demand from the rest of the world to stock up on the reserve currency. So for example, historically, if you look at the period where you really think, oh my God, the dollar is going to hell, right, where the trade deficits have gone to hell, it's the period after the Asian crisis, when the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s, when Asian countries decided that they didn't want to be at the mercy of foreign creditors, so they stocked up on reserve currency. Point is, you're right. To have reserve currency doesn't necessarily mean at any given time you're picking up debt. What it does mean is that your policy is basically a residual. The rest of the world, when the rest of the world wants your currency, you've got to make it available.
I think that you're right, but I think that most of the people why we're here right now is because we already know that the dollar has been adopted worldwide. You go any country and you take the dollar and you can use it. Now, the new paradigm is basically what happened with cryptocurrency. When it's going to be widely adopted by everyone and taking the power from central banks, taking the power from all the Federal Reserve or you name it, all the federal, and give the power back to the people. I think that that's the new paradigm that needs to be solved, and I think that the adoption widely, like most of the country, will help to eventually move to cryptocurrency. That's what we're looking for, right?
So yeah, I think reserve is probably not the application there. Right? Reserve currency isn't what people are looking for. They're looking for currency that's less subject to government manipulation. They're looking for currencies that can be used for international transfers with fewer fees. But reserve is a particular application that the US dollar is the only. The US dollar is the only currency in the world willing to serve right now as a reserve currency. There was a while when the euro was interested in it. They're not interested in it anymore because it would require them to run a trade deficit and they're unwilling to. So,
and if you read the news right now, there are a lot of China, Russia that are getting together to avoid using the dollar and using their own currencies, and they're going to skip eventually the dollar. I mean, that's coming. And most of the countries are going to go and do treaties, but they don't know about this new technology that we're here today.
Well, so I have a little bit of comment about this. I actually, out of the blue, kind of emailed a fairly well-known economist that didn't want his name to be used, and and he was willing to chat with me on the phone for a half hour about cryptocurrencies, and it was mostly about Bitcoin. And he essentially thought that it was not going to succeed, but he thought that they could coexist. And so I don't know. That sounds slightly more like what Steve is saying. So is that? Okay, we'll either ask you to speak up so we can hear it, or else we'll proceed. Maybe you can talk with Steve afterwards a little bit. Okay, so this is an Ethereum meetup, so we want to think about Ethereum a little bit. So one, obvious thing is, what is the job of the products? Well, the only problem with the products is that even this is wonderful the things that you can do with Ethereum. There's great things, and I'm sure Nick Szabo is thrilled to think about this, or at least he's very interested in the project. But there is some reasons for caution. Ethereum is not actually released yet, and even when it is released, this platform and protocol stack is going to take longer to build and develop than the products that are built on top of it. At least that's my anticipation. So, TCP/IP existed for a long time. What is it now? It's like 40 plus years, but and it took 20 years or something for the web to be built on top of it. And so if we think Vitalik Buterin has compared Bitcoin to, if Bitcoin is like email, then Ethereum would be like JavaScript. So let's, rather than thinking about too much about the products, let's think about the Ether currency and Ether contracts themselves, the underlying technology, before we think about the jobs for an Ethereum, products built on Ethereum. So what is the job of the Ether currency? So I think actually it solves one big problem of Bitcoin, and that's usability. It's got this nice identity contract in there, and you can have a nice, string associated with your Ether account, which is going to look something like a Twitter handle. So I think it makes cryptocurrency easier to use, the Ether currency easier to use. It's also the fuel or gas for the Ethereum ecosystem, for an Ethereum contract. So again, some of the Ethereum core people have said that if Bitcoin is like gold, then Ether is like oil. Another job then is stock in the Ethereum company. So if you believe in the Ethereum ecosystem and that Ether will increase in value, maybe you just want to hold on to some Ether. Another important thing is to just think about what is the job of an Ethereum contract itself. And I actually think that it's to implement a business model. So we've talked about business models, how important they are. So I'm an engineer. I think about technology. But it's easy for me to focus on that. What can be done technologically. But if you're out interested in the economy, interested in making a startup, for example, you need to think about the business model. We've talked about that. That's what innovation is. So I think the job of an Ethereum contract is to implement the business model for an Ethereum-based business. So it's got a few features, these Ethereum contracts. It's got easy built-in financial system and currency, all the features of the Serpent language. But one feature is that it's open source. So we've had, the web is essentially open source. JavaScript, you can see the JavaScript of what people use on the web. So if Ethereum becomes widespread, then you'll also be able to see essentially what other people's Ethereum contracts are, and insofar as their business model is contained in that contract, you'll be able to see what it is. And if you want to implement copy that and use a lower cost margin, change the parameters or something, you'll certainly be able to do that. And in particular, it might be that you implement some contract such that the profits or the revenue, I guess the revenue is the right word, I'm sorry, the profit is the right word, may go to a distributed organization rather than to a centralized one. So some Ethereum people have talked about compared Ethereum to the start of the internet. And it's like crypto 2.0. So the internet produced some companies like Google and Facebook, which maybe they started off with a small kind of, with some ideals, of sharing some idealistic values. They're now very big companies. And so it's at least possible that some large distributed organizations can grow up in Ethereum.
Good question. When you create a contract, can you modify it in the future, or is it going to take forever? Or that's part of the contract, you can say this will never be modified?
Practically, I think that you can, but a specific contract can't be I mean, you can modify the functionality, but you need to technically you can't modify a single contract's code, but you can use tricks to get the same effect, as far as I understand.
By writing your code in data and just having an interpreter be the...
Yeah, or it's probably a little bit simpler to use, to have pointers to other, to write pointers to other contracts, since contracts can actually be called as functions.
But, and you can have the pointers to other contracts be variables, and therefore you can change the variable to a new contract.
Yeah, but as we've said previously, Ethereum is not released yet, so I don't want to get too far down describing that, but I think that's, my understanding is that can happen. Please.
You were talking about Bitcoin in the context of disruption and you moved to Ethereum.
That's right.
So you were comparing Bitcoin, you were actually setting up the context that Bitcoin is a disruption, and then you moved to Ethereum. Just wanted to clarify, this first two seems to be a feature of Bitcoin too. Is the third one the unique thing between Ethereum and Bitcoin?
Maybe you're talking about this slide right here, maybe?
No, actually I'm talking about the next slide. So is the third feature of distributed organizations, the revenue going to the distributed organization, does Bitcoin also have a similar feature, or is it unique to Ethereum?
Yeah, so there's all three of these. I was referring to specific things which are features of Ethereum specifically. So Bitcoin has a currency, but it doesn't have quite the same ability to do a full financial system, as I referred to in the first bullet there. In the second bullet, your Ethereum contracts can be, your Bitcoin scripts are open and visible, but again, they don't have quite the same features as Ethereum. So the idea of them as being business models is a little bit harder to make. So yeah, in some sense, all these can apply to Bitcoin. I think that they apply better to Ethereum. Okay, any other questions here? Please.
So you're making a distinction between Bitcoin and Ethereum, that Ethereum has functionality baked into it that enables these things. Maybe it's outside the scope of this conversation, but can you talk a little bit more about that functionality?
Yeah, so just briefly, Ethereum has a full-on programming language built into it. Bitcoin scripts language is not quite so powerful. So, for example, this identity contract I talked about earlier, such that you could have a nice little handle, similar to a Twitter handle, associated with your Ethereum account. That's not available with Bitcoin. That's something that'll be in there from the start with Ethereum.
It's a protocol level identity.
Yes. Yeah.
And your position sets a huge value add, because at Bitcoin you can layer on an abstracted sort of identity layer.
Yeah, but it's not decentralized. Yeah, you're certainly right. So onename.io, for example, adds that identity that I was talking about for Bitcoin, and they put it in a Namecoin. They put it in Namecoin, but Namecoin is a separate blockchain from Ethereum. So there's a whole discussion that could be made comparing Ethereum to Bitcoin and the relative strengths and benefits. So I think you're right. It's a little bit of a separate discussion. Okay, just to kind of wrap up here, I pulled this slide off of asimco.com, and my previous slides regarding the iPhone also came off of asimco.com. And I'll zoom in a second, but this is showing essentially 100 years worth of technology adoption rates. So this is just showing the adoption. It's not showing how these are, drop off when new technologies come. If you look on the right there, we have things like the HD TV and the smartphone and the tablets. On the left, it's things like the electricity in the car. On the left, the slopes are a little bit more shallow. On the right, a little steeper. So this green stripe down the middle, that's showing the life expectancy of a person born at the date along the x-axis. You know, at some given point here. For example, if you look on the far far left, it starts at 1900, and the top green bar is showing the life expectancy of someone born in 1900. So even as life expectancy has increased, the rate of adoption of new technologies has decreased. So within, previously, the rate of adoption of some technology might have taken your entire life, but off to the right, it's just taking, just a few years for the smartphone. Within all of our lives here, the smartphone has went from, 0 to 90% adoption. So zooming in a little bit. Even though this plot doesn't show, so I'll give you a bit of numbers here. The P over there is essentially the adoption rate. We're showing it go from 9% to 91%. What we're showing, showing the adoption rates. We're not, so for each one of these technologies, there's something else that's being replaced by this. So there's something else that's being disrupted. So back to thinking a little bit about Bitcoin. One of the things that Ethereum and Bitcoin have had is there's been lots of talk about that these could improve the lives of people everywhere. There's been lots of for the people idealism, maybe improving democracy worldwide. But just as a little reminder, things like the TV and the color TV and radio and the PC and the internet and smartphones have all had similar descriptions made about them. Lots of idealism, and I think they have. Maybe they have improved the lives of people everywhere. But I just read this book by Tim Wu that talks about a cycle in technology. And he talked about how the FM radio was delayed for essentially 30 years by RCA because they just didn't think it was good enough. And I guess that's a little bit of a sidetrack. But each of these technologies, the TV, the PC, and the internet, they started out as being viewed idealistically, and they've kind of become captured by big business. I don't know if captured is the right word, but they have big business that are very much involved in their operation. So I guess one question about Bitcoin and crypto technology is, what will happen in the future? Will it indeed be this revolutionary technology for example, decentralized autonomous organizations, or helping people out, helping the people out, bringing democracy and other good things, improving the lives of people everywhere. Okay, so just in conclusion, I'd like to say that I'd love to help any of you out with your Ethereum or Bitcoin or even signal processing projects. You're welcome to contact me at any of these addresses here. I'll share a version of these slides out on the meetup group and also on Reddit. So if you guys have any questions or criticisms, we certainly had some questions previously. Maybe there's a few more. Please.
Yeah, I have a comment. Get back to the slide on
Which one?
Earlier ones. Curve on utility, yeah. I have a slightly different thought on how we probably model that. I think the really important factor here is the ceiling of the older technology, I think, is going to be different. It had a lower ceiling than newer technology that come along.
have extremely optimized, a lot of hacks have been put on the model. You have Visa, you have banking system improving on that. And it reached a certain ceiling that it's no longer possible to improve beyond that. Now, Bitcoin started with a higher starting point, and then currency, paper currency was invented thousands of years ago. It has a way higher ceiling that it can reach. So I think the exciting part is not that Bitcoin is going to reach the same height as this dollar, but it eventually has a much higher ceiling that it can reach. I think that's more exciting. And also has a much kind of faster acceleration of innovation. So I guess the curve is not like that, but it's more like this. You have a much faster acceleration.
Well, certainly these curves here have different slopes. So that would agree with your thoughts there. All right, guys. Any other any questions or?
Obviously, you did a huge amount of research on this, and you have been working for a lot of years in Bitcoin. Is that true?
Oh, I'm an LT engineer. This is like some weekend work for me. I'm not at all a Bitcoin guy. I'm an LTE engineer. I work on the LTE physical layer. So
What is an LTE?
it's a long-term evolution. It's a 4G wireless technology. Sorry, I don't know why I assumed you know LTE, but yeah, just think something your cell phone probably uses, or the next one you buy may, if you're current.
How did you get involved with Ethereum?
I just thought that it was kind of a cool thing, and so it's I had a little bit of time suddenly, and so I dived into it. So it's an interesting topic. Please.
You said that sometime in the medium term there were going to be coins issued for Ethereum. Can you talk about the structure behind that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
You said that sometime in the medium term future there would be coin issuances for Ethereum. Can you talk about the structure behind that?
Okay, so I'm actually not a core Ethereum guy. I'm just doing this because I'm interested in it, and so the core Ethereum team has not announced when they will have this sale of Ether. What they're going to do is since they have a pre-mine, they're going to sell some Ether, and they're going to pre-mine those and issue those to the people that buy them. And initially, we're going to talk about doing it in February, and most recently at a Bitcoin conference in Toronto. There's been lots of discussion about doing it then, but so it's like a product release. I mean, a lot of times I think a lot of us are involved with various product releases, and to do a good job, it's quite often it gets pushed back. So these guys, I think, are trying to do a good job. So there's not a date released yet when that would be, but you might, guess within the next month, or if not, then 2 months, something like that.
Have they released public information on the amount of volume?
There's going to be no limit. That's one thing they've been very consistent on. There will be no limit on the amount of Bitcoin or amount of Ether that you can pre-purchase.
So it will grow unlimited?
They may put a limit on the per identity per purchase, so that you might have to use a different Bitcoin address to purchase it from. But it didn't seem like they were too precise about that.
So this is for the initial round, but I mean, in terms of the lifetime of the ecosystem, is there an app that we talked about how they're going to structure the release of coins and apps?
Yeah, so if you there'll be a fixed amount released every year, mined every year. They're going to have it, each block that's mined, it's kind of like as in Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a steadily decreasing over time amount of Bitcoin that are mined each block. With Ethereum, it's actually going to be a fixed amount mined each block, and that's the amount that will be mined each year. Is, I think that they had it set to be something like a third of what the pre-mine is. Anyway, there's a specific algorithm which will determine how much will be mined each block based on how much is purchased. I'm sorry, could you speak?
It may have evolved since I last looked at it. There was an issuance model, and I think it was slightly inflationary, like 2% or something we had every year, whereas Bitcoin is 21 million Bitcoins, and that's it.
Actually, if you look at the long-term asymptotic inflation properties, it looks very similar to Bitcoin. So so there's a point at which Bitcoin will do no more, but if you look at that same rough point of time with Ethereum, will effectively have very low, I mean, it will be so low inflation that it's very close to zero, so that you don't need to worry about it too much.
From what I understand, they're planning on taking 10% of the initial, all the initial coins, and just adding 10% of that every year. So it'll be lower inflation each year, or lower inflation each year, moving on. And they've assured from what I've read that you won't need to rush to buy them. They'll be open for a while to purchase. So it's not going to be a very undramatic situation. It'll be well thought out, or give you time to pick up.
Anyone knows if they have a limit, like with Bitcoin you have 21 million, I think? Or,
No, actually, I think that was what I was just saying, that there is no limit. It's going to be a fixed amount mined each year, so there's no limit to the number of Bitcoin, or Ether that you mine.
But it's the same number every year, from what I understand.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it will be less percent each year.
What type of problem is keeping it from being released? Like, what type of?
Well, these guys are, so they're anticipating a fair amount of interest in it, but they don't want to. They're trying to make it sure that it's legal. Let's say that you and I buy it, and we, there's some people that I'm guessing at least, I don't actually talk to too many people about this, but I'm pretty sure there are people who don't report some of their Bitcoin transactions on their taxes. So that's fine. And maybe if you do something with Ether, maybe you won't need to either. But they want to make certain that it's legal, for example, in the U.S. and elsewhere. So they'll set up a corporation in Switzerland, and they've structured it so that it's not, so that you're just buying Ether. It's not, at some point they call it an IPO, and maybe it effectively is in some sense an IPO, but they're calling it a pre-sale. That allows them a little bit more legal freeway. Oh, does that answer your question at all?
Kind of. It's like the area is the legality of that is related to an IPO.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like there's Satoshi Nakamoto who started it by himself and is anonymous. So people that we know who they are, and so, you're certainly welcome to go in and ask that specific question, for example, on the Reddit forum, and maybe you'll get a better answer from them than I would.
After doing a research on it, my perception, and I don't know, I would like to hear from other people too, about Ethereum, they're trying to use the business model like Linux did. They have a free version for everyone to use it, and then they may have like an enterprise level or charge that actually are making money based on keeping a percentage of the pre-mined coins that they have to sell. Obviously they have to make money, right? But they want to have a huge amount of adoption by developers, what Facebook did, which is
in the sense that they're keeping some of the revenue for paying developers and paying some of the founders. I think it is like a business, but there's not going to be an enterprise version as far as I understand. I've never heard the idea of there being an enterprise version.
I did an analogy.
Okay, great.
But kind of close to it. I don't know. Anyone who searched about it?
I thought they're planning to sell software or like just services that operate on the Ethereum platform. I mean, their aim is to make Ethereum as quickly as possible be decentralized so that they don't actually have control over it.
So they're going to split it up. Actually, there's going to be a for-profit, which apparently is small to start with, which will be spun off of that. This is getting into speculation. I don't actually want to go too far into that, so I don't want to say myself since they haven't actually announced it. So my preference is to wait for a few weeks or a month.
And one thing, if you look at it, at the activity of financial firms around Bitcoin, there has been a ridiculously high level of interest by financial firms in electronic currency. And those are the people that Ethereum would be the most qualified team in the world to serve if they wanted an industrial service based on blockchain technology built. So there are probably big contracts out there for them that don't involve them, you know, mining their own coin or anything. They just can make money off of Goldman Sachs or
Yeah, Goldman Sachs is part of them too.
What's that?
One of the videos was saying that they had Goldman Sachs members.
Former Goldman Sachs members.
Okay, former.
So yeah, I mean, you know, there's no direct contact.
Oh, okay.
Okay, guys, we can. It's 8 o'clock. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.